Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, debt, slay, search, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go to Iraq today and talk about the fact the IMF is setting up a new bailout of Iraq. And the numbers fluctuate a little bit depending on which article you read, but it looks to be like it's $5.4 billion initially, and then potentially another $15 billion more, and then that this bailout will be spread out over 3 years. Anyway, Iraqi officials have come out and said they need to do this to improve their international credit rating because they want to get back into the bond and debt market, and then also they need to deal with their budget deficit. And a lot of course, the budget deficit has been a problem because of this ongoing war with ISIS, which is eating up a lot of Iraqi treasury, as well as the fact that they have suffered from the oil revenue drop. And in fact, they have a financing gap of $17 billion. So I would assume that the bailout will end up having to be the greater amount, because $5.4 billion over 3 years is not going to cover a financing gap of $17 billion. And of course, it'll be an ongoing problem if oil continues to have a low price. And so this has caused a huge budget deficit for Iraq. And like I say, this trend seems like it will continue, so there'll be ongoing bailouts. And there've already been ongoing bailouts. Back in October 2015, the IMF was already discussing the bailout that is going on right now. And not only that, previous to that, in July of 2015, there was a $1.24 billion emergency funding from the IMF to Iraq. So once again, if they get an emergency loan last year and now they're coming back for another $5.4 billion bailout, there will be more coming, I would assume. And a lot of it is because they have a budget deficit of $25 billion last year, and considering their total budget's only $100 billion, having a budget deficit of $25 billion is huge. And Iraq is certainly not alone in this. It turns out, just like I did a video that the IMF and the World Bank are heavily involved in bailouts all over Eurasia. It turns out the IMF is involved in a lot of bailouts, potential bailouts in the Middle East and North Africa. So we have Iraq getting this new IMF bailout. We also have Tunisia, Jordan, Morocco, and Egypt all lined up for trying to get IMF loans and or renewals of old loan agreements. And so there's more details about those 4 countries below, but it's certainly a trend. And then we also have the complexity added to this IMF bailout to Iraq, that there's negotiations going on that Kurdistan in Iraq will have to end up getting some of the funds, and it'll be interesting to see how that works out, because my understanding is that right now the Baghdad government is withholding making government payments to the Iraqi Kurdistan region, and has caused quite a economic problem in Kurdistan as well. So this might be a good way for the United States and the international community to bolster the Kurdish efforts against ISIS by helping sustain their economy in this tough time themselves. But when you look at the details of the IMF agreement, one of the things that stands out is that part of the loan conditions is that they have to first pay off billions and billions of dollars in arrears to foreign oil companies. So I think that's a key component of what we have here, because we know the World Bank and the IMF are involved in politics. They're involved in foreign policy. They're involved in the global corporate governments, and having transnationals have all this access. So we're seeing not only transnationals having this access to Iraq, but also having a World Bank that enforces their property rights and money owed. So anyway, that's unfortunate for Iraq. So we'll see how much of this bailout actually goes to Iraq and how much of it ends up going back to pay the oil companies. And so the ISIS strain on the economy is quite notable. So between the fact that the oil prices aren't skyrocketing at this point, and there's still a global surplus, and the fact that the ISIS war will continue to go on, I assume there's going to be continued drags on the Iraqi economy. And for those who are really interested in the Iraqi currency, in the Iraqi banking system, and the economics of Iraq, I recommend a channel called the American Contractor. He covers this in great deal and does a great job. And but part of this IMF loan is to, of course, fill in the $17 billion gap from the Iraqi budget because of the oil revenue drop, and then of course all the money that they supposedly are going to spend on the fight for ISIS, and saying now they're going to use it to buy more equipment, probably from the U.S. again, and then hire another 10,000 soldiers. So good luck with that. And then, as usual, the IMF has even more conditions for Iraq, that they need to have more effective tax collection, which it must be an extremely daunting task in a place like Iraq. And then also improve their banking practices, which of course is IMF code, making sure that the banking system is open to Western companies and the exploitation. There's certainly Iraq certainly seems to be having trouble attacking all the corruption in the banking system and the oligarchy and the ruling class there. And so once again, this IMF loan, you have to scratch your head and wonder, here's a country that is basically disintegrating. It looks to be that eventually it could break up into 2 or 3 or 4 parts, and a government that's barely in control, parliament being stormed twice in the last couple of weeks, and ISIS spread out all over the country, and a separatist movement in Kurdistan, and everything else that's going on in Iraq. And just amazing that the IMF can consider this country stable enough to go in there and give them another bailout. But that's how it goes in the unreal world of the real world. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.